Imagine waking up every single morning feeling exhausted before your day has even started. You scroll through your phone before you've even gotten out of bed. You see someone's vacation photos and suddenly feel like your life isn't enough. You check how many likes your last post got. You read a news headline that makes your stomach sink. And all of this happens within the first 5 minutes of being awake. Now, imagine that this isn't just your personal struggle. Imagine that ancient sages, thousands of years ago, sat in deep meditation and saw this exact moment coming. They wrote about it, they warned about it, and they called it Kalyug, the age of darkness. Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about something that very few people discuss in this level of depth. We are going to explore what Kalyug actually means, not just as a religious concept, but as a description of the psychological, social, and spiritual reality that billions of people are living through right now, without even realizing it. And more importantly, we are going to talk about how to protect yourself, how to rise above it, how to live powerfully in the middle of an age that is designed to pull you downward. This video is going to be long. It is meant to be, because this topic deserves real depth, not a 3-minute summary. So get comfortable, take notes if you want, and let's begin. What is Kalyug? Before we get into the 7 points, let's quickly understand what Kalyug actually is, because a lot of people have heard the term but don't fully understand the concept behind it. In Hindu philosophy, particularly in texts like the Bhagavad Gita, the Vishnu Purana, and the Srimad Bhagavatam, time is described as moving in cycles. These cycles are called yugas. There are 4 of them: Satya Yuga, Treta Yuga, Dvapara Yuga, and Kali Yuga, what we commonly call Kalyug. In Satya Yuga, which is sometimes translated as the age of truth, human consciousness was at its highest. People lived for thousands of years. Dharma, or righteous living, was fully intact. Spiritual awareness was the norm, not the exception. Life had a natural peace to it. As the cycles progressed through Treta Yuga and Dvapara Yuga, things slowly began to shift. Dharma declined by 1/4 in each age. Lifespan shortened, conflicts increased. Greed, ego, and material obsession slowly started to enter the picture. And then came Kali Yuga, the final age in the cycle, the age we are in right now. In this age, Dharma is said to stand on only one leg. Truth, morality, spiritual awareness, inner peace, all of these have significantly declined. And the qualities that oppose them, greed, ego, deception, distraction, and selfishness, have significantly increased. Now here is something important. The ancient teachings don't say this to make you feel hopeless. They say this to prepare you. They say this so that you understand the nature of the age you are living in and can make conscious choices to rise above it rather than being unconsciously dragged along by its current. So with that understanding, let's get into the 7 major ways Kalyug is affecting us and what we can do about each one. Point 1. The mind has become a battlefield, and most people don't know they're losing. The problem. One of the most devastating characteristics of Kalyug, according to ancient teachings, is the decline of mental peace. And if you look at the world around you today, this is almost impossible to argue with. We are living in the most technologically advanced era in human history. We have access to more information, more entertainment, more comfort, and more convenience than any generation before us. And yet, anxiety disorders are at an all-time high. Depression affects hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Burnout has become so common that it barely shocks anymore. People wake up exhausted, go through their day stressed, come home and collapse in front of a screen, and then can't sleep because their mind won't stop racing. This is not a coincidence. This is not just bad luck for this particular generation. According to the philosophy of Kalyug, this is the natural consequence of an age where external stimulation has become more powerful than internal discipline. Ancient texts describe the mind in Kalyug as being increasingly restless, what they sometimes called chanchalta, or constant flickering. The mind jumps from thought to thought, from desire to desire, without ever settling. And in the modern age, this has been amplified to an almost unbearable degree. Think about what your mind is subjected to on any given day. You wake up and immediately reach for your phone. You are hit with notifications, news, social media updates, messages, emails, all demanding your attention simultaneously. Then you go through your days surrounded by noise, pressure, comparisons, expectations, deadlines, and the constant low-level anxiety that comes from feeling like you're never quite doing enough. Then you come home and instead of allowing your mind to rest, you fill it with more stimulation. Netflix, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, until it's time to sleep again. The result? The mind never gets to breathe. It never gets to settle. It never gets to heal. And when the mind is never at rest, it slowly begins to break down. Concentration becomes difficult. Emotional regulation becomes harder. Small problems start to feel enormous. Relationships feel draining. Life starts to feel like something you're just surviving rather than actually living. The examples? You can see this playing out everywhere. Young people who have never known a world without smartphones are reporting some of the highest rates of anxiety and depression ever recorded. The average attention span has dropped so dramatically that people struggle to watch a video that is more than a few minutes long without reaching for something else. People describe feeling addicted to checking their phones even when they know it makes them feel worse, a phenomenon that
psychologists have confirmed is real and that technology companies have deliberately engineered. We are in an age where the most powerful companies in the world are competing for your attention, not to help you, but to sell it. Every scroll, every swipe, every notification is designed by teams of psychologists and engineers to trigger a dopamine response in your brain and keep you coming back for more. The mind, in other words, is being used as a resource, and most people are allowing it without even realizing it. And the consequences go deeper than just feeling stressed. When the mind is in a constant state of low-level stimulation and anxiety, it affects your body. It affects your sleep. It affects your relationships. It affects your ability to think clearly, to make good decisions, to feel genuine happiness. It affects everything. So what do you do? The ancient answer, and interestingly, the modern psychological answer as well, is this. You have to reclaim your mind before the world uses it for its own purposes. The first and most powerful practice is cultivating silence. Not external silence necessarily, though that helps, but internal silence. The ability to sit with your own thoughts without immediately running away from them. This is what meditation is really about. Not some mystical experience, but simply the practice of sitting quietly and training your mind to stay present rather than constantly darting away. Start small. 5 minutes of silence in the morning before you pick up your phone. Just sit. Breathe. Let your mind settle the way sediment settles in a glass of water when you stop shaking it. Over time, this simple practice begins to create a buffer, a space between stimulus and response that gives you back some measure of control over your own mental state. The second practice is deliberately limiting the stimulation you allow into your mind. This doesn't mean living like a monk and avoiding all technology. It means being intentional. It means asking yourself, is this content adding to my life or is it taking from it? Is this making me feel more peaceful and capable or more anxious and inadequate? You have to treat your attention like money because in Kalyug, it is money. It is the most valuable resource you have, and everyone is trying to take it from you. The ancient teachings about protecting the mind were essentially describing thousands of years in advance what neuroscience and psychology have since confirmed, that what you consistently feed your mind becomes your reality. Begin a daily practice of mental hygiene. Journal, meditate, spend some time each day in genuine stillness. Reduce the amount of anxiety-inducing content you consume. These are not luxury practices. In the age of Kalyug, they are survival practices. Point 2. Materialism is swallowing people alive, and they're calling it success. The second major characteristic of Kalyug is the replacement of genuine values with material ones. Ancient texts are remarkably specific about this. They describe an age where a person's worth is measured not by their character, their wisdom, or their kindness, but by their wealth, their status, their appearance, and their social influence. And if you look at the world today, it is difficult to argue that this isn't exactly what has happened. We live in a culture that has essentially turned materialism into a religion. Success is defined almost entirely in financial terms. Status is displayed through possessions. The car you drive, the brand on your clothing, the neighborhood you live in, the vacations you post about online. Worth is measured in numbers. Your salary, your follower count, the square footage of your home. And the insidious thing about this is not just that it's shallow. The real problem is that it doesn't work. Study after study in modern psychology confirms what ancient philosophy knew thousands of years ago, that beyond a certain baseline of comfort and security, additional material wealth does not increase happiness. People who chase wealth and status as ends in themselves tend to find upon reaching their goals not satisfaction but emptiness. And then they set a new goal and chase that, and find emptiness again. This is the trap that Kalyug sets. It promises that if you just get more money, more followers, more status, more things, you will finally feel complete. And because you never actually feel complete, you keep chasing. You keep running on the treadmill, and your entire life slowly passes by in the service of goals that were never going to make you happy in the first place. Look at the culture of social media, which is perhaps the most concentrated expression of Kalyug's materialist tendency. Entire subcultures have emerged around the display of wealth, what some people call flex culture. People take out loans to buy cars they can't afford just for a photo. They go into debt for vacations they can't afford just for the content. They filter and edit their lives into a fiction of perfection, and then spend hours anxiously checking whether people are validating that fiction with likes and comments. And this affects everyone who observes it. The psychological research on social comparison is clear. When people are constantly exposed to curated images of other people's apparently perfect lives, their own satisfaction with their real life decreases. You might have an objectively good life, loving relationships, health, meaningful work, and still feel like it's not enough because Instagram told you it wasn't. This also shows up in how people make major life decisions. People choose careers not based on what gives them meaning or plays to their genuine strengths, but based on what pays the most or sounds the most impressive. They stay in jobs they hate because the salary funds a lifestyle they feel they need to maintain. They pursue achievements not because they want them intrinsically, but because they want what those achievements will signal to others. The ancient teachings described this dynamic precisely. They said that in Kalyug, people would measure another person's virtue by their wealth, another person's beauty by their external appearance, and another person's wisdom by their ability to speak impressively. Depth would be replaced by surface. Character would be replaced by image.
For most people, when they do this honestly, the answers have nothing to do with wealth or status. They want to feel connected to the people they love. They want to feel that their work matters. They want to feel healthy and alive in their body. They want to experience beauty, meaning, and purpose. These are the real needs, and they are surprisingly cheap to meet. The second practice is what we might call a comparison fast. For a defined period, say 2 weeks, deliberately stop consuming content that exists to display wealth, status, or perfection. Stop comparing your life to the highlight reels of others. Use that mental energy instead to actually invest in the things that matter to you. Most people who try this report that within a few days, their baseline sense of contentment begins to rise significantly. Third, and this is crucial, define success for yourself in your own terms and write it down. What does a genuinely successful life look like to you, independent of what your culture, your family, or social media has told you it should look like? When you have clarity about your own definition of success, the endless external comparisons lose their power because you have your own measuring stick. Ancient philosophy consistently described the antidote to materialism as viveka, discrimination, or the ability to clearly distinguish between what is real and what is illusion, between what nourishes and what merely stimulates. Developing viveka is not a one-time event. It is a daily practice of choosing depth over surface, meaning over distraction, character over image. Point 3. Truth is drowning in noise, and lies are learning to swim. One of the most frequently cited characteristics of Kalyug in ancient texts is the decline of truth and the rise of deception. The Vishnu Purana specifically says that in Kali Yuga, the only way one person can triumph over another is through deceit, that honesty will become rare, that manipulation will become normal, that the loudest, most convincing voice will be followed, regardless of whether what it says is true. Look around. Does that sound familiar? We are living in what many commentators have begun calling the post-truth era. Misinformation spreads faster on the internet than true information. Entire political movements have been built on demonstrably false claims. Advertising is, by its nature, a profession dedicated to making things appear better than they are. Entire industries exist to manufacture public consent, shape perception, and make people believe things that serve someone else's interests. And it's not just institutional deception. At the personal level, the age of social media has created an epidemic of performed identity. People don't just present a curated version of themselves, they have come to believe the curated version is the real one. Authenticity has become rarer. The gap between public persona and private reality has become a chasm for many people. There is also an epidemic of what we might call low-grade dishonesty, the kind that doesn't rise to the level of obvious lying, but that slowly erodes the fabric of trust. People say what they think others want to hear. They agree publicly with things they disagree with privately. They stay silent when they should speak. They exaggerate their accomplishments, minimize their failures, and present a version of themselves designed to gain approval rather than genuine connection. The cost of this is enormous. When truth becomes unreliable, trust breaks down. And when trust breaks down, genuine relationships become impossible. Community becomes impossible. Society becomes fragile. Consider the information environment most people are navigating today. You can go online right now and find confident, well-produced content that will tell you virtually anything you want to believe. There are entire ecosystems of misinformation about health, about history, about science, about politics that look and feel exactly like real information. And because most people don't have the time or the skills to rigorously fact-check everything they encounter, they end up forming their understanding of the world partly on things that are simply not true. The consequences are real. People make health decisions based on misinformation and harm themselves. People form political opinions based on manufactured outrage and propaganda. People make financial decisions based on hype and manipulation. And because everyone's information diet is different, people increasingly cannot even agree on basic facts, which makes constructive conversation and collective problem-solving nearly impossible. At the personal level, consider how many relationships are built on a foundation of performance rather than authenticity. How many people do you know, really know, in the sense of seeing and being seen honestly without masks? For many people, the answer is very few or none. And this is not entirely because people are bad. It is because the age rewards performance and punishes vulnerability. It rewards the mask and ignores the face beneath it. There is also an epidemic of what we might call low-grade dishonesty, the kind that doesn't rise to the level of obvious lying, but that slowly erodes the fabric of trust. People say what they think others want to hear. They agree publicly with things they disagree with privately. They stay silent when they should speak. They exaggerate their accomplishments, minimize their failures, and present a version of themselves designed to gain approval rather than genuine connection. The cost of this is enormous. When truth becomes unreliable, trust breaks down. And when trust breaks down, genuine relationships become impossible. Community becomes impossible. Society becomes fragile. Consider the information environment most people are navigating today. You can go online right now and find confident, well-produced content that will tell you virtually anything you want to believe. There are entire ecosystems of misinformation about health, about history, about science, about politics that look and feel exactly like real information. And because most people don't have the time or the skills to rigorously fact-check everything they encounter, they end up forming their understanding of the world partly on things that are simply not true. The consequences are real. People make health decisions based on misinformation and harm themselves. People form political opinions based on manufactured outrage and propaganda. People make financial decisions based on hype and manipulation. And because everyone's information diet is different, people increasingly cannot even agree on basic facts, which makes constructive conversation and collective problem solving nearly impossible. At the personal level, consider how many relationships are built on a foundation of performance rather than authenticity. How many people do you know, really know, in the sense of seeing and being seen honestly without masks? For many people, the answer is very few or none. And this is not entirely because people are bad. It is because the age rewards performance and punishes vulnerability. It rewards the mask and ignores the face beneath it. The answer to living in an age of deception is to become in your own life a person who is committed to truth, even when it is uncomfortable, even when it is costly, even when no one is watching. This sounds simple. It is actually one of the hardest things a person can do in Kalyug, because the incentives are so strongly aligned against it. Truth often costs you something in the short term. A lie often gains you something in the short term. And in an age obsessed with short-term gains, the temptation to deceive in small ways and large is constant. But here's what the ancient teachings and modern psychology both understand. Sustained deception is corrosive to the self. When you lie to others or to yourself, you create a gap between who you are and who you present yourself as being. And living inside that gap is exhausting. It produces a chronic, low-level anxiety. It hollows out your relationships because genuine connection requires genuine presence. It makes you fragile because you have to constantly manage the fiction you've created. Honesty, practiced consistently, has the opposite effect. It simplifies your life dramatically. It builds the kind of deep, stable self-respect that no external validation can give you. It allows you to have real relationships. It makes you mentally and emotionally stronger over time. Practice this. For 1 week, make a commitment to say nothing that you don't actually believe to be true. Not cruel truth, you can choose your words with kindness, but accurate truth. Stop agreeing when you disagree. Stop performing enthusiasm you don't feel. Stop saying you're fine when you're not. Notice what happens. Notice both the discomfort, which is real and expected, and the strange, quiet relief of not having to maintain a performance. On the information side, develop critical thinking as a daily discipline. Before you share something, ask whether you actually know it to be true. Before you form a strong opinion, ask whether you've genuinely examined the evidence. Seek out sources that challenge your existing beliefs, not just confirm them. This is hard and often uncomfortable work, but in an age of noise and manipulation, a disciplined relationship with truth is one of the most valuable things you can cultivate. Point 4. Relationships are becoming transactions, and loneliness is the price. Ancient texts describe relationships in Kalyug as becoming increasingly transactional. Friendships are formed based on usefulness. Love is temporary. Loyalty becomes rare. Family bonds weaken. The deep, unconditional connections that once formed the foundation of human community slowly dissolve under the pressure of self-interest. And if you look at the data on modern loneliness, the picture is alarming. Loneliness has been called an epidemic by public health researchers in multiple countries. Surveys consistently show that large percentages of people, in some studies the majority, report having no one they could turn to in a genuine crisis. The number of people reporting having 0 close friends has tripled in recent decades, and this is happening while we are more connected digitally than at any point in history. That paradox is the heart of the Kalyug relationship problem. We have more connections than ever, we have fewer deep ones than ever, and the two things are related. The proliferation of shallow connections has in many ways crowded out the space and energy required to build deep ones. The ancient teachings identify selfishness as the root cause of this decline. When people treat every relationship primarily as an opportunity for personal gain, emotional, social, financial, or otherwise, the relationship cannot develop the depth that true connection requires. True connection requires the willingness to be genuinely present for another person, not just when it benefits you, but especially when it costs you something. In an age that increasingly rewards self-interest and treats caring for others as optional, this kind of selflessness becomes genuinely countercultural. Look at how people talk about relationships today, especially in online spaces. The language of transaction has become normalized. You hear people talk about cutting off anyone who isn't adding value to their life. You hear advice like protect your energy used to justify a kind of aggressive self-focus that would have been considered profoundly antisocial in any previous era. You see people treating friendships like subscriptions that can be canceled the moment they become inconvenient. Now, there is a legitimate point buried in some of this. Genuinely toxic relationships are real, and removing yourself from them is sometimes necessary. But the pendulum has swung so far in the direction of self-protection that many people have lost the ability to tolerate the normal friction and difficulty that are inherent in any real deep relationship. Real friendships require sacrifice. Real love requires showing up when you don't feel like it. Real community requires giving more than you take, at least sometimes. These are not optional add-ons to genuine human connection. They are their essence. And an age that has normalized treating every relationship as primarily a vehicle for personal optimism.
The ability to sit with a difficult problem, to follow a complex argument, to stay present in a conversation without wanting to escape. These capacities will return, and when they do, your quality of life in almost every domain will improve. Second, deliberately structure your relationship with technology rather than letting it structure you. Turn off all non-essential notifications. Decide in advance when you will check your phone, rather than responding to every interruption. Create phone-free zones in your home. The bedroom is particularly important because sleep quality directly affects cognitive function and emotional regulation. Third, practice doing nothing. This sounds trivial. It is actually profoundly difficult and profoundly important. The ability to sit quietly, without entertainment, without a task, without stimulation, and simply be present is a capacity that is rapidly disappearing from modern life. And it is precisely in those moments of stillness that the most important thoughts, insights, and creative connections tend to arise. The ancient practice of meditation is at its core a training in exactly this capacity, and the evidence that it works for cognitive function, emotional regulation, and general well-being is now overwhelming. Your attention is not just a resource. According to ancient philosophy, it is the lens through which reality enters your consciousness. What you pay attention to becomes your world. Guard it accordingly. Point 6. Morality is being redefined from the bottom, and most people haven't noticed. Ancient texts about Kalyug describe a gradual process by which behaviors that were once recognized as harmful or wrong become slowly normalized, accepted, and eventually celebrated. This is not about prudishness or nostalgia for a simpler past. It is about something deeper, the gradual loss of a shared moral foundation, a sense of right and wrong that exists independent of personal convenience or social trend. The mechanism the text describes is incremental. No single generation wakes up and decides to abandon all its values. Instead, it happens one small step at a time. Something that was once clearly unacceptable becomes complicated. Something complicated becomes situational. Something situational becomes normal. Something normal becomes obvious, and then a generation grows up for whom the original value is simply incomprehensible, not rejected, but not even on the radar. In Kalyug, this process is said to accelerate because the rewards for cutting moral corners become greater and more visible, while the costs are delayed and diffuse. Dishonesty in business, if it works in the short term, gets imitated. Exploitation of people, if it leads to visible success, gets rationalized. Corruption, when it goes unpunished, becomes normalized. And slowly, a culture shifts its moral center of gravity without any single catastrophic decision. This has profound effects at the individual level, even for people who are not themselves engaging in overtly unethical behavior. When the cultural environment normalizes selfishness, deception, and exploitation, it creates a kind of moral exhaustion, a sense that trying to live with integrity is pointless or even foolish. Why be honest when everyone around you is lying and getting ahead? Why be generous when the culture rewards selfishness? This is the Kalyug track at the moral level, the normalization of compromise. Look at the business world. The normalization of practices that would once have been considered clearly wrong, exploiting workers, externalizing environmental costs, manipulating consumers, evading taxes through legal loopholes, is so widespread that many people don't even see them as moral failures anymore. They're just called strategy or competitive advantage. Look at political culture in many countries, where dishonesty, manipulation, and the abuse of power have become so normalized that expecting politicians to tell the truth feels naive, where the entire discourse is conducted in bad faith, and everyone knows it, and nobody seems to know what to do about it. Look at personal relationships, where behaviors like ghosting, simply disappearing from someone's life without any explanation or closure, have become so common that there are think pieces debating whether they're actually okay. Where using people for personal advancement and then discarding them is framed as protecting your energy. Where basic relational responsibility, keeping commitments, being honest about your feelings, treating people with care, has somehow become optional. None of this happened overnight. It happened through the incremental normalization process that Kalyug describes, and the cost at the social level is a pervasive erosion of the trust and mutual accountability that genuine community possible. The solution here is not to become a moralist who lectures everyone around them. It is to become a person who quietly, consistently, without fanfare, lives according to genuinely held values, regardless of what everyone else is doing. Ancient philosophy describes this as dharma, not as a set of external rules imposed from outside, but as a deep alignment with one's truest nature and with the fabric of right relationship between people and the world. When you live in alignment with your dharma, there is a quality of integrity to your life, a coherence between what you believe and how you act, that produces a kind of inner stability that nothing external can easily shake. Practically, this means being willing to do the right thing even when it costs you something, not paying a bribe when it would be easier to pay it, not cutting corners when it would be more profitable to cut them, not treating people as disposable when the culture says that's fine, not lying for convenience, not letting the standard of the people around you become your standard. It also means cultivating what ancient philosophy called viveka, discriminating awareness, the ability to see clearly in any given situation what is truly right rather than just what is convenient, popular, or self-serving. This requires ongoing reflection. It requires the humility to question your own rationalizations. It requires asking, when you are about to make a moral compromise, whether your reasoning is genuine or whether you are simply finding sophisticated ways to justify doing what you wanted to do anyway. The person who maintains genuine integrity in an age of moral confusion stands out enormously, not because they are perfect, but because authenticity has become so rare. And paradoxically, people are drawn to it. The hunger for genuineness, for trustworthiness, for someone who actually means what they say and does what they promise, this hunger is everywhere in the modern world, precisely because its object has become so scarce. Point 7. The spiritual dimension is being ignored, and that is exactly why nothing else is working. The problem. The final and perhaps deepest characteristic of Kalyug and Indian teachings is the decline of spiritual awareness. And by spiritual, I don't necessarily mean religious, though it can include that. I mean something more fundamental. The awareness that you are more than your thoughts, your desires, your social roles, and your accomplishments. The understanding that there is a dimension of your existence that goes deeper than the surface level of personality and possession. The recognition that life has a quality of meaning and connection that cannot be found in the external world, no matter how diligently you search for it there. In Satya Yuga, this awareness was said to be the default state of human consciousness. People lived from their depths, not from their surfaces. In Kalyug, it is said to become the exception, and a hard-won one. The noise, the distraction, the materialism, the constant stimulation, all of these make it increasingly difficult to access the inner dimension that makes life genuinely worth living. And here is the cruel irony. All of the other problems we have discussed, the mental unrest, the materialism, the deception, the broken relationships, the fragmented attention, the moral confusion, all of these are essentially symptoms of this one underlying condition. When people are cut off from their own depths, from any sense of meaning or transcendence, they become vulnerable to all of those other pathologies. They seek in external things what can only be found internally. They try to fill with wealth, status, stimulation, and social validation the inner emptiness that only genuine self-knowledge and spiritual awareness can address. This is why, for all the genuine improvements in material conditions over recent centuries, the psychological and spiritual suffering of human beings has not been proportionately reduced, because the hunger that drives them is not a hunger for more things. It is a hunger for meaning, for connection, for the sense that their existence matters and that they are part of something larger than themselves, and no amount of material progress addresses that hunger. The evidence that this spiritual hunger is widespread is everywhere once you know to look for it. The explosion of interest in mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and various spiritual practices across cultures and demographics that would never have engaged with these things a generation ago reflects a deep, widespread sensing that something essential is missing from modern life. The crisis of meaning that shows up in mental health statistics, in the prevalence of what psychologist Martin Seligman calls learned helplessness, in the epidemic of what some researchers call deaths of despair, in the widespread feeling that life is happening to people rather than being shaped by them, these are not primarily psychological problems. They are spiritual ones in the broad sense. They reflect the absence of the inner life, the loss of connection to what is deepest and built in oneself. This is why, for all the genuine improvements in material conditions over recent centuries, the psychological and spiritual suffering of human beings has not been proportionately reduced, because the hunger that drives them is not a hunger for more things. It is a hunger for meaning, for connection, for the sense that their existence matters and that they are part of something larger than themselves. And no amount of material progress addresses that hunger. The evidence that this spiritual hunger is widespread is everywhere once you know to look for it. The explosion of interest in mindfulness, meditation, yoga, and various spiritual practices across cultures and demographics that would never have engaged with these things a generation ago reflects a deep, widespread sensing that something essential is missing from modern life. The crisis of meaning that shows up in mental health statistics, in the prevalence of what psychologist Martin Seligman calls learned helplessness, in the epidemic of what some researchers call deaths of despair, in the widespread feeling that life is happening to people rather than being shaped by them, these are not primarily psychological problems. They are spiritual ones in the broad sense. They reflect the absence of the inner life, the loss of connection to what is deepest and most real in oneself. You can also see it in the desperation with which many people seek intense experiences, extreme sports, psychedelic substances, experiences designed to jolt them out of the numbness of ordinary modern life. There is nothing inherently wrong with wanting intense experience, but the desperation behind the seeking reveals something important. People are hungry for a depth of feeling and meaning that normal modern life, for all its comfort and stimulation, consistently fails to provide. And in many religious communities, you see the opposite failure: the forms of religion without its substance. People going through the motions of prayer, ritual, and doctrine without the inner transformation that genuine spiritual practice is supposed to produce. This is also part of what Kalyug describes, a hollowing out of genuine spirituality even within formally religious contexts, leaving the shell of practice without the living content of genuine inner change. Ancient teachings about Kalyug make an interesting and somewhat hopeful claim that while spiritual awareness is hardest to attain in this age, even small steps in that direction carry unusual power. The effort required is greater, but so, proportionally, is the reward. What does genuine spiritual development look like in the modern context? At its core, it is the systematic turning of attention inward, the cultivation of self-knowledge, the development of inner stillness, and the gradual, deeply personal discovery of what you actually are beneath the layers of conditioning, personality, desire, and fear. The specific form this takes will vary enormously from person to person. For some people, it means a traditional religious practice, prayer, scripture, ritual, community, entered into with genuine inner engagement rather than merely performed as a social obligation. For others, it means meditation, practiced with enough consistency and depth to actually